me, just so I can test this, why don't you tell me your name and the address here?
My name
Yeah.
is Mary Lou Whitlock, and I live at 16 Brigham Street in Payne City, but we get our mail as Macon, Georgia, 31204. Is that enough?
That's fine. When did Macon City become incorporated? Payne City.
1919. I believe that's what's on the map down at the Civic Center now.
Now, prior to Payne City becoming incorporated, what was here?
Just the mill and a few houses. You need to talk to my daughter.
Actually, I've been given her address and her phone number.
Well, honey, she's in Dublin, Georgia, and she's teaching summer school, and she's working every morning until 12 and 1 o'clock, and then she's getting ready to leave to go Saturday to see her brothers in California, so
Okay.
she wouldn't have time
All right. Well,
to
maybe
talk with you.
I'll write her a letter or something like that.
But see, she has wrote the history and development of Payne City, and now she's got this book that she's got on printing press now being published that she's going to sell. But
I'm going to ask you a question that's all the way on the other end of where I want to start. I'm going to start on the opposite end.
well, Payne City was incorporated in 1919. Before then, I don't know. I couldn't tell you what took place because I have forgot what she found out. But these houses here were not here at that time. There was a few houses on that street. Now, Miss Parks was born right there in that house.
Was the mill here?
The mill was here. I couldn't tell you when it was built because she said there was Payne and Willingham was kinfolks, and they got together and they built these mills. And there's people that's living here, that's been living here practically ever since it was built. And she interviewed some of them, you see, while she was talking to them. But some of them are not here now.
They died.
And because but it was 1926 when I moved to Macon, to Payne City, with my family.
Where did you move from?
And I moved from Thomaston, Georgia, to Macon.
How old were you in 1926?
I was born in 12. So I was just 14 years old. But I went to work in the mill when I was 12 because a widow woman's child at that time could go to work at 12 and a half.
A widow woman's child?
A widow woman's child.
And your mom was a widow?
And you had to have a certificate from the Board of Health and the school board to do it. So I went to work in Albany, Georgia.
So you left your mother?
No, my mother, my daddy died, I was 10 years old. And he was a tenant farmer. And we lived in the country. Well, you know what a tenant is. It's just like we lived in this place and it belonged to the big manufacturing company. He lived in the country on the other man's place and farmed his land, see. And when he died, I was only 10 years old, and Mother had 10 minor children. So we moved to the cotton mills in Albany, Georgia, and as we would get old enough to go to work, we would go to work. So I went to work before I was 13 years old in Albany, Georgia. Well, we moved from Albany, Georgia to Thomaston because we had a friend that said we could do better making a living in Thomaston for the Thomaston Cotton Mills, which was owned by a man by the name of Callaway. These Callaway Gardens up here, if you've heard about them, they was named for his wife that owned the Thomaston Cotton Mills. And we lived there a while, and then we decided to come to Macon. And so we moved to Payne City in 1926.
So were you living in a mill village in Albany,
Albany
Georgia?
And in Thomaston.
What was that village like in Albany?
About like this one. It was just little houses grouped together like this that the people that worked in the mill lived in.
Was it a nicer house than the one you lived in on the farm?
Yeah, yeah. It was nicer than we lived in on the farm. It was just about as good as this. And of course now, at that time, people didn't have this sheetrock. You know, the houses were sealed. These houses was not sheetrocked until 52 and 53. They was just had the ceiling in it, you know, the tongue and groove ceiling. And they sheetrocked these houses in Payne City in 1952.
How many rooms did you have in Albany?
We had a 4-room house because we had a big family. See, there was my mother and 10 children. And so as we would get old enough to go to work, we would go to work. And so I was a little over 12, but I wasn't 13, and I went to work there.
What was your first job?
Working in the spinning room, learning to spin.
Who taught you?
The woman's name was Flossie Smallwood. And so then we moved to Thomaston because somebody told us we could make more money there, you know.
How long did it take you to learn how to spin?
Well, they don't give you but about 3 months to learn how. They pay you a learner's wages about that time. But at the time that I was learning, you would have to learn how to. You wouldn't know what I was talking about, but you would have to learn how to do the spinning until you could run one side of a spinning frame. They got 2 sides to them. And then when you got to where you could keep that one side up, they'd give you 2. And then when you got to where you could keep up those 2, they would continue putting, and you got paid according to the number of sides of the machine that you run.
So the faster you learned,
the more money you made.
How quick were you?
I learned pretty good. I learned pretty quick because we stayed there 2 years, and I could do about as much as anyone else could at that time.
What were the conditions like in the mill when you first started in Albany?
Well, I would think they was just about the same as it was when I quit working, when I retired.
Could you describe them to me?
We had good overseers. We had good bosses. I don't think working in the cotton mills was very much of a problem. We just didn't make any money. But we made about as much money as anybody else did. I worked for 10 cents an hour in Albany. Worked 60 hours a week for $6.
When you were 12?
When I was 12.
It's hard work.
Yeah, but as I said, you know, the more work you done, the more pay you got. And then when we moved to Thomaston, it was the same way. And I would say the working conditions was about the same in any of the mills.
There was a lot of lint, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of cotton lint.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of lint everywhere. I mean, and we didn't know when we first went to work. We didn't wear masks. You know, we didn't wear hearing aids and things like that.
I've never been inside a mill, so if you could
See,
describe the inside of a mill for me, what that's like, I'd appreciate it.
Well, it's just one great big building. You've seen this building up here, and there's different departments to it. And when the yarn, when it goes in there, it's a bale of cotton. You've seen a bale of cotton.
Yes, ma'am.
And then they have what they call an opening room. They open that bale of cotton, and they chew it up.
Who worked in the opening room?
Mostly men and black men more. There was always a white man in charge, but back then they used a lot of black men for jobs like that. 'Cause it was very dusty, and they did wear masks over there, you know, because they was in the real dusty part. 'Cause you see, when that cotton come in, it was just like it had come from the gin where it was baled from the country, you know. And then it would go from one machine to the other. That each machine it went through, it would change its shape, and a lot of the dust would be out of it. And then it would come out, and it'd be about that big, and it would be just a great big cotton string, you know. And it would go in cans.
So it was in the opening room, and then it went into the carding room?
Yeah.
And And then what? Then which room?
Then from the cards, it would make this little string that would go down in the cans, big cans about that big around.
Now, did women work in the carding room?
No, not in that part. And then it would go from the carding to what they call slubbers. And them slubbers would take these cans of cotton that was in the little strings about like that. Well, when they finished it, the slubbers, it was smaller then, and then it went to what at that time they called speeders, which made it smaller. And then it would go to the spinning room, and it was called roving, R-O-V-I-N-G, roving. And it was put in the spinning frames then, and when it come out, it was a thread. And that was the kind of work I did. Now, they did, in later years, some women work in what they called around the speeders in the card room, you know. But it was a little bit more dangerous work than spinning was. Most of the people that worked in the spinning room, most of the spinners, I'll say, were women. They had men that did the maintenance work, mechanic work, and the men that they called dolphers, which would take the full bobbins off the frames and put an empty bobbin on there to fill up again, you see. And mostly they would use men for that.
Now, your job, did you always spin or did you change it?
Always, that's all I ever did.
How many years did you spin?
Well, I retired at 62, so I'd say 50 years. Because I went to work at 12 and came out at 62. But I had, and that's the only kind of work I ever did in the mill. But when it left the spinning room then, it went to what they call spoolers, unless it was a weave shop.
Now, they didn't have a weave shop here
no,
in Kane.
No, not in this mill, but now they did in Thomaston and in Albany. And you had two kinds of, if it was a weave shop, you had two kinds of spinning, and one was called warp and one was called filling. And the warp yarn was to make the great big warp things that went to the warpers, that they would put that thread on them, and then it was put on the loom. Now, this warper thread was just a great big, however big the loom was, and since they got to making sheets wide, you know, the first I ever saw was just about 36 and 40 inches is what we did in Albany. But you know, now they make it for queen and king size beds, see, and the looms have to be that big.
Now, when you started spinning, give me a sense of your day. When you got, you woke up, tell me about your day.
Well, we had to be at work at, let's see, we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning because this was in Albany now, because they'd blow a wake-up whistle.
For the village?
To wake you up to get ready to go to work.
What did that whistle sound like?
Just almost like these whistles you hear now that blows for the air raid signals.
Can you do one?
Huh?
Try one.
You hadn't heard the air raid signal?
Let me hear you try and do one.
It'd be, ooh, like that, loud. It would wake you up.
How many blasts?
Oh, I'd say 4 or 5 or something like that, And then they would blow that whistle when you went to work.
So they blew the whistle to wake you up?
And then they'd blow one for you to go to work, and then they'd blow one for you to quit. And at that time, we would have a dinner hour. We'd go to work at, well, let's say if we went to work at 7 o'clock, and we'd go home at 12 and have a 40 minutes for dinner.
Who made your dinner for you?
My mother did mine, because she never did work. And she would have dinner ready, and then we'd go back to work. And we would work till, we'd work 12 hours, no, we'd work 11 hours a day. And then we'd work 5 hours on Saturday morning. See, 11 hours was 55. and then we'd work 5 hours on Saturday morning, see.
So what did you do from 5 a.m. till you got to work at 7? You had 2 hours.
You had to get up and get ready to go to work, get breakfast and dress and things like that. You didn't have to get up that early if you didn't want to. You know, just so you got to work. And see, back then people just had wood stoves and they had to cook biscuits and whatever you wanted to eat before you went to work. You didn't have these microwaves and electric ranges and gas stoves and things like that then.
Did your mama keep a garden?
Yeah, she would make a garden, and then she had all the small children to take care of. And sometimes she would fix meals for people that worked in the mill that didn't have anybody to fix meals for them. She'd have several people coming in just to eat dinner in the daytime.
So they come home with you at lunchtime?
Yeah, and eat dinner, see. And it was a money-making project for her, and she could probably make enough money doing that to feed her whole family, see, off of what she made fixing meals.
And while you were inside the mill and you were working?
You worked when you was in there. Of course, we had water toilets. They were not the first ones that we had in the mills, even after we moved here. They didn't even have private stalls to them. It was just a great big long place in there, like the country toilets is made. You used them, and of course they were water though, would keep them clean. But then finally they, got to making the little different stalls, and
How fast do you reckon you were working back then?
not like I was when I quit. You had to work pretty fast to keep up with the spinning frame, because to get the right twist in the yarn, it had to be running so many revolutions a second or a minute, from where it come out here until it went down here and got twisted. See, that's how it got twisted. It came through some rollers here that covered it top and bottom like this. And then as it came through there, it was cotton. And it went down to the spinning bobbin, and ever how fast that run, you see, that was the twist rate to how the yarn was twisted. And when it came off the spinning frame, it was thread.
Did you have time to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, we always had, we had to make our time though, on the job that I did in spinning. You didn't stop that frame except to doff it. That was when the doffers changed the bobbins. Because when you stopped that frame, you wasn't making any money. You only made money as it run.
I've heard tell that that there was time though on the job for people to talk to each other, was it?
You could have that much time. Yeah, you could speak to your neighbor. If you could make the time on your job, you had to make the time on your job. Now when you in the spinning department you did. But now when you came on up to the spoolers and the other sections of the mill, you couldn't stop on that machine because it had to keep going. And then when they had a stop time or break time, they would have to shut down their machine, see, like for lunchtime or things like that. But the spinning frames, they kept running all the time. They wasn't stopped except to change the bobbins on them.
I feel somewhere I read that
I wished you could go in one and see it.
when people were working 12 hours a day, that there was times when their machines would break down, and then they'd have time to sort of socialize and go outside.
Yeah,
have
yeah.
lunch outside,
If the machines broke down. Now up here, after I started working here, of course I came to work here in 26. Half of this mill was run by an engine that was run with fire or engine, big furnace and that big smokestack you see on top of it. and that's where it was at. That furnace had to be fired, and there was a boiler in there, and it was run by steam. But that was the first part of the mill that was bought before I came here, was built. But by the time I came here, they had built another section on it that was operated by electricity. And the main belt that went from the boiler room that pulled the main pulley that went through the mill, like your belt on your dryer or your washing machine. You know, it goes from the motor, but it had this main shaft that it would pull and had so much power to it. Well, if that rope broke that went from that boiler room to that pulley, well, then that whole section of the mill would close down. And that happened the day that they came out on strike up here. The rope broke on the pulley.
Is this just a coincidence?
Yeah, it was just a coincidence that it happened, because it would happen, you see. They had an engineer that was his job to see about that, you know. And he was important. But of course, they had somebody to fire the boiler and all like that. It was fired with coal.
I think that
But is
Mr.
it?
Whitlock, Arthur Whitlock's father did that, didn't he? Wasn't that his job to keep?
Yeah, sometimes he did. Yeah, he was kind of a watchman at times, and when he would have to, on his rounds, he would have to fire the boiler as he would. You know, they had a clock to punch, and they would go around. There was different places in the mill you had to punch that clock to let the people at the Western Union know you was on the job. See, and in that round he would have to keep the boiler fired. But I don't think he ever was just a fireman, you know.
So you were telling me about that day of the strike.
That was the day that the rope broke, the day they come out on strike. Well, now that had to be in '34 because my baby was born in May. And I had been at work about 2 or 3 weeks after he was born when that happened.
You were working in the spinning room.
And I was working in the spinning room. I was working on the side that the rope broke on. And they had been talking strike all that morning, you know. And some of the women had said, well, you gonna come out with us. They was talking about what time they was gonna do it. Well, as it happened, when the rope broke, that just set a time, you know. So the ones that worked where the steam that run by steam, they couldn't work anymore till that rope was fixed. Somebody that knew how had to go in there and splice a new rope together and everything before they could start it back up. And so when that happened and we all came out that worked on the steam side of the mill, I would say about half, and it was about half and half. The rest of them walked out. Well, we was expecting it. Instead of me going home, I sit down up on that woman's porch that lived. That house is not there now. It was on the other side of that one that's there now, up there by the gate. And a lot of us did. We just hung around up there because they were talking about coming out, so they just came on out. And so then when Willingham and Atlantic heard that Payne had walked out, well, here they all shut their mill down and come out here to help. They was going to help them. See, they were trying to organize a union, and they thought that would be a good way to do it.
If all the mills did it together.
Get together and get everybody to join a union. But we never was union. None of the mills in Macon never was. None of the cotton mills in Macon never was unionized. As I know of, I don't think they ever were.
You said that the women were talking about it in the morning.
Yeah, they were talking about it. See, they had been talking about, been trying to organize, trying to get you to join the union, see.
How long have they been trying to?
Oh, about a year, I'd say.
Could you tell me about that?
Well, they
How
would.
did it start?
Well, they would just try to talk you into signing a paper that you was going to join the union, you know, and be a member of that certain union.
Do you know which union it was?
No, I don't. And so that's when that was the beginning of the strike, when that part of the mill broke down that morning. They were already planning it for some time that day, you know. Well, when we had to come out because we couldn't work because our machines wasn't running, well, then the rest of them all walked out, and that started it.
Now, did people think that you were on strike?
When
you all walked out?
I was not on strike.
Was it assumed that everyone who walked out was on strike? I mean,
Yeah.
It must have been a mix-up.
It was Yeah, if you walked out, except the ones that their machines had shut down, see, they walked out on strike, see. And so that's when the people began to gather around up there in the mill, and it was quite a sight around the mill, you
What
know.
did it look like? What happened?
Well, it's just a lot of people gathered up out there, you see, walking and milling around and and things like that.
Now, when you were you sat down, you didn't. You said you sat on a porch.
Yeah, I sat down on that porch and just watched to see what was going on.
Had you ever seen anything like that
Uh-uh.
before?
Because there wasn't a union in any of the cotton mills in the South. I don't know whether they ever unionized in Thomaston or not. And that was a big cotton mill town. It's about all there was there at that time. Of course, it's enlarged some since then, but there was just several cotton mills there at that time. And it was about the only thing there was in Thomaston. Of course, they had to be stores and things like that to supply the people that lived there, but they lived on mill villages too, just like we do here.
So on that day, did people came from all the other mills, and what did the mill do?
Well, they tried to keep the mill running, see, and of course they knew that rope was broke over there. Well, when they got the rope broke, then they was wanting the people to come back in to work. Well, you see,
When
the
they
ones
fixed the rope.
when the ones that was out on strike, they wasn't going back. They was going to walk a picket line. See, they was going to keep us from going in. Well, you see, if people's walking a picket line and you cross that picket line, you're actually supposed to be breaking the law. And if you touch one of them pickets, if they're walking a picket line, it was with the cotton mills, and they would be so many that you couldn't get by without touching someone, you know. But they wasn't allowed to stop. So that day the social worker came and got me to go up there to work, and I wouldn't take my children to they opened up the community house as a nursery because the black people were scared to come. And I had a black maid, and they were afraid to come, and so that's when they opened up this community house, this big 2-story building where the parking lot is now. And they got women to go up there to open up the nursery. And
On the day of the strike.
well, after that, not that day, but after that, and they also fixed lunches for the people that worked. You could go by there and eat dinner
Instead of coming home.
instead of coming home, because most people that worked, they had these maids that fixed their dinner and tended to their babies, you see. And they didn't have that because the black people was afraid to come to work. And so they did that for the people that did work. And it was quite some time before we was able to get the black people back. That's when I said when Mr. Gardner, he was going over there and get some of those black men, you see. And at that time there was the railroad was on top of the road over there that went from the Cristo plant across over there on this road here. And that's where they met him over there one day, and some of the strikers, and was going to turn his car over. But he had got smart, and he had put some shock things on it.
Shock things.
You know, had his car electrified or something. Now, so I was told. See, all I know about that is I was told, because I had to stay at home with my children until I could get somebody to come and keep them, till I could get my maid to come back, except what time Ms. Whitlock kept them for me to work, see. Because my husband, he was doing watching duty, like they even carried me in from here down to Taylor Mill, which is in Taylor County. They own one down there, to keep the union people from disturbing the people in that mill.
How did you do that? What was your job?
He was a watchman.
They brought your husband to Taylor County.
Yeah, and you see, and things like that.
Was he deputized like a sheriff?
Yeah, they were deputized to go, and they carried them down there for that purpose, you see.
How long did he stay there?
Well, they stayed quite a few days, you know, and like that. it took quite some time to get the union business settled, and then they said they were not going to hire any of the people that walked out. But when it was settled, they had to put these people back to work without discrimination.
Who made that ruling?
I guess the government did, because they had to go back to work just like we did without discrimination. They were put back on their jobs and were not discriminated against just because they did that, because they didn't ever get it unionized, you see. And so they didn't just let those people stay without work, because they needed the people to run the mill, and they were willing to go back to work. During the strike, it lasted a pretty long time. Now, I couldn't tell you how long, but I lived over on Green Street, and there was a man lived back of me that was in the strike. See, we was working, and they wasn't getting any pay, except maybe what the union, the union will promise you they're going to do this and do that and the other, but they don't do it. I know you've heard of other big unions doing that. And there was a man lived back of me that one little child went down the street and threw a sweet potato down, and he picked that potato up and brushed the dirt off of it and gave it to his baby to eat. Now that's how bad it got. People just didn't have food to eat, and because they wasn't working, wasn't getting no money. I wish you could talk to somebody that could describe it to you more definitely than I can.
Well, you're doing a real good job. Did you have friends of yours that were involved in the strike?
Well, of course, everybody was my friends, but none of my family was. And my husband's sister, she hadn't worked in a long time, and because she had been out she had rheumatic fever. I was trying to think of it, and the doctor had stopped her from work. Well, she went back to work after that, and then there was one man that was a master mechanic.
During the strike, she went to work.
Well, there was a master mechanic up there that his wife worked only when they would need her. She was a spinner, and she just worked when they wanted her to come in or something like that, and so she went to work. And people like that, that really wasn't working, they just went back to work during the strike to help the company out.
Were you afraid to cross the picket line?
Well, the social worker, see, we had a social worker in each community. The big manufacturing company did. You see, they had 3 mills in Macon.
Bib number 1.
And bib number 2 and Payne Mill.
Now, did you know people at the other mills too?
Yeah, oh yeah. We'd have these women's clubs, and we'd get together from all 3 mills, and then one year the whole bib company, the people from Bib City and people from Taylor Mill and people from Porterdale and Macon, the women club, all got together and went on a trip to Savannah Beach. There was 3 bus loads of just women that went to Savannah Beach, and things like that. And then we'd get together, and the girls and boys would do the same way. And of course, I never was a girl during that time, but now Miss Parks was. I'm about 4 years older than she is, and she went with the girls reserves when they made that trip to Washington D.C. And
so you tell me about the social worker. The social worker helped you get through the picket line?
Yeah, she come and, I told you she wanted to take my children to the nursery, and I said, no, they can't go. Well, their first cousin, they had carried her baby to the nursery, and she was about 5 years old, and she says, no, she was keeping her. She was babysitting her. And she said, well, if we go, her name was Virginia now, and she says, well, if I go get Virginia and take her to the nursery and bring Granny over here to stay with your children, will you go? And I told her, yeah, I would. And Granny was their grandmother, see. And so that went on for a long time. Granny'd keep my babies, and her little girl went to the nursery. And but now they run that nursery for a long time after the strike and everything was over, and the lunchroom. For years they run that. Just
Did they start the nursery during the strike?
they started it during the strike, the nursery and the lunchroom right there in that building. And they kept it going a long time. In fact, my little girl that was born that year, it was still going on. She was born in 49, and let's see, the strike came off in 34, and they still had the nursery there when she got big enough to go to the nursery. And she wasn't born till 47, and the strike came off in 34. And they still had the nursery then.
Did the social worker help you get inside the building?
Yeah, they were picketing, walking back, some going one way and some the other like that. And there was a man, and his name was Charlie Cochran, and he was a striker, and he was on the picket line. And he had been a maintenance man in the mill, if I'd have said section foreman or something like that, but he was called a maintenance man. And she said, "Mr. Cochran, will you stop and let me by?" And he did. And she carried me on by to the gate, and I went in and went to work. And what they were trying to do was to show the strikers that they could run the mill without them. And they would start up part of the mill over here, and they was on both sides of the mill back yonder where the railroad.
Surrounded both
Yeah,
sides
and they would start up part because they couldn't get enough in there to run the whole plant. And they'd run part of it on this side and part of it on that side, so they could hear the machinery running. See. They really worked it out just fine, and then as
so
you
the middle of the mill wasn't working, but the sides
they just
all around the windows.
on each side. And at that time the mill was not air conditioned. Did you notice where those great big looked like windows had been set in with bricks, and then they had these little things inside of them? Well, that mill was air conditioned the year she was born in 47. They air conditioned that mill while I was out when she was born. So you see, back in the 34s, there was just great big windows like them in there in my kitchen, you see. And they could be opened. They had these little slide out things, you push them out and
But they couldn't be opened.
Yeah, they could be opened. Yeah, they could be opened. Because we didn't have air conditioning, and we had humidity, because if the fabric got too dry, it would break. See, if the fabric in the mill would get too dry, it would break. Then if it got too wet, it would get sticky. And so that was the only way they had of keeping the temperature in the mill the right way. And one summer it got so hot and dry before they put in the air conditioning, and they couldn't run the spinning room, because when that yarn would get so dry, they couldn't run it, it would break. And they tied the fire hose on top of the mill where the spinning room was at, and just let it run down on each side of the mill like that.
With the windows open, you could hear the sound of the mill.
Oh, yeah. You see, it was glass windows, bigger than those in my kitchen, great big double windows where you seen all that. You could tell it looked like there had been a window in there. And you could open those windows, see, and they could hear the machinery running.
So that's what they were doing to the strikers.
Yeah, letting them know that they could run the mill without them. The company won, because the union didn't win. But they had to put those people back to work that wanted to, without discrimination. They had to go back on their same jobs and everything.
I've heard some people tell me that some people didn't get to go back to work afterwards, that they were blacklisted if they were real involved in the union.
Yeah, and they was kind of blacklisted.
So some went back to work, but others weren't allowed. I've heard that there's a lot of violence.
There was.
Do you remember that?
No, because I stayed at home. But they did gang up down there, as you said, in that field, one night, and they already had these big vans parked down there.
Who had the vans? The company?
The company, and I guess the police was cooperating with them some way or another. Anyhow, they had those big vans parked down there, and they gathered up down there, and they was going to call it a prayer meeting, you know, and people from all over everywhere was there. There's lots of people there. So they just went in at the prayer meeting, yeah, and it was union people, yeah. So they just went in there with tear gas, and what they could, after they threw the tear gas in there, they loaded them up in them vans and hauled them off to jail. And I'm sure they had to pay a fine before they got out.
Actually, I read an article
About
that listed all the names of the people that were
Did
arrested.
you? Mm-hmm.
Should I read it to you?
If you don't,
I don't
well,
mind.
no,
You don't want me
just
to.
forget about
I
it.
just wonder if any of those folks are still alive.
Well, I know some of them are, but I mean, about the ones that was arrested, I'm not so sure about
Are
that.
any of the people that were involved that wanted the union and that had gone back to work, are they still around?
I'm not sure, not around here now. Now, I have one lady in my Sunday school class. Now, I don't know whether her sister's still living or not, but she was the one that tried to get me to walk out that morning. And
You mentioned her name before.
Ann Wilkes, you know, but then she married after that, and her daddy was in that group, and then she had a sister named Edatha, and she goes to my Sunday school class now. Her sister does. Then Mr. Wilkes had a son, and he's still living, but he's in real bad health.
What about Mr. Corcoran?
Who?
Mr. Corcoran, is that right?
Mr. Cochran?
Cochran.
Cochran. He's not living now. He's
But
not.
Mr. Whitlock pointed out his house to me.
This is a Cochran that lives right here, but he's in the family, but that wasn't his daddy. Now, he's got a son that lives right back over here across from this branch. If that woods wasn't growed up back there, I could show you his house.
Mr. Cochran had a son who
Yeah,
lived there.
lives over on Kingsbury Drive.
Was his son involved too?
No, I don't think he was. He would be like back my son's was at that time, 'cause he's about their age, yeah. He's about their age. 'Cause that Cochran man and my son, the second one yonder, they used to be in they used to sing. They had a band and they'd sing. They had a quartet and all. So he's about the age of my children.
Do you think it took a lot of courage for those people that wanted to strike to do so?
I think it took a lot of courage for that, and then I think it took a lot of courage for the people that didn't strike to go back. 'Cause you see, they were actually breaking the picket line, which was supposed to be against the law. But there were so many people went back until the bib won, you know. The non-union workers won because they never did organize a union.
Do you want something for your foot? Or are you just exercising?
I just exercise it because I have a bad knee. I mostly sit yonder.
Would you be more comfortable?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I got a bad knee, and that's the reason I keep doing it.
How'd you get a bad knee?
The doctor wants to claim that I got a pinched nerve in my spine back here that's causing it. And I've had 2 shots of cortisone put in it. And he said, we can't keep putting that cortisone in there. He says, that's what's causing all that pain from my hip all the way to my toes. And he says, when those pain pills get to where they won't ease you, we'll have to get a neurosurgeon go in there and fix that. And sometimes I can't even lay down, because just to lay down, this leg, laying on it, the pressure will make it hurt so bad, you know, and I've got to take a pain pill to relieve it. And when I had my medical doctor, I went to him first, and he says, I sure am glad it's not your knee. But it's, I can't even say it. I got the card in there that sent to Medicare about it, that I have to show people, tell them what it's called. But anyhow, it's something about the spine right there. And my medical doctor says, I sure am glad it wasn't your knee. But I fell off a ladder about 2 years ago that caused it.
Well, you
or
doing
maybe a
on the
little
ladder?
later. I was standing on that step ladder there at the back. I was wanting a piece of that fiberglass up there wasn't nailed down right, and I was going to get up there and put a nail in it. And I got along just fine. I was standing right on the top of the ladder, see, long as I was holding on to the building, see. But when I turned the building loose to take the nail and the hammer to drive it down, see, the ladder shot out from under me.
Oh, you fell all the way down?
And my feet was up this way, and my head out that way, and the ladder was on top of me.
Oh, no. Oh.
Well, when I first was conscious of what happened, I said, well, Lord, I wonder if I can get up, because wasn't anybody here but me. Well, I got up pretty good. I threw the ladder off and got up. I didn't feel like I was hurt anywhere, and I climbed back up on the ladder and laid some bricks up there. Because the wind would flop that fiberglass.
It must have been when you went up on the ladder the second time that you hurt yourself.
No, it was when I fell. That's when it happened.
Sorry that happened.
Because then it began to give me trouble, and I went to my doctor, and he x-rayed it, and so he told me that's what
How
it
old were you
was.
2 years ago?
2 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, I'm 78 now.
Well, I hope I'm climbing up on top of roofs when I'm 76 years old. That's inspiring.
I still climb that ladder.
You do?
It ain't been 3 months, about 2 months ago, that I got a great big extension ladder and climbed up in that tree out there and cut some limbs off of that tree that I didn't want up there.
That's great.
About 2 months ago.
That's great.
And I climbed up that pecan tree out yonder.
Why are you so strong?
See, I just propped it up to the ladder, and I was sure it wasn't going to fall,
How'd you get so strong?
Well, I've just always done what I wanted to do. And cut some limbs off of that pecan tree that I didn't want out there on it.
Do you
And-
get pecans out there?
I get about 100 pounds a year off
Do
of
you
it.
use them?
I give them away, and I got a lot of them in the freezer now. 3 or 4 pecan pies in the freezer too.
Do you have any that aren't in the freezer?
And but it ain't been more than 6 months ago that those dogwood trees there, and they belong to that woman over there, they was rubbing my roof and on top of my house out there. And I got a longer extension ladder that belongs to my grandson. And I couldn't hardly put it up. It was so heavy because it was
But
way
you did
longer.
anyway.
But I did. I got it up there. And then she heard me out there doing it. And she came out and she helped the ladder so it wouldn't fall. And I climbed up there and cut some limbs. And now, when it quits being hot weather, and I just saw it with a regular handsaw.
We were talking about courage.
That what?
Courage. You
Courage.
said it took a lot of courage to cross the picket line.
Yeah, it did.
I bet.
Oh, we got talking about something else instead of
Oh,
the
that was
strike, didn't
We
we?
were talking about how strong you are. It's about courage. It takes courage to climb up a ladder, let me tell you.
Well, it took courage to cross that picket line, see, 'cause you wasn't supposed to do it. That's what they picketing for, like you seen them. They have these, it ain't been too long ago since this Kegel chicken place down here all went out on strike. They wanted more money. And you remember just last week, one down here went out of business 'cause they was trying to unionize it, and the company wouldn't accept it, and he just shut the place down. But the Kegel company, they went out on strike, and they had this picket line going down there, and it goes on day and night. It don't ever stop.
Did people call you names?
Oh yeah, they'd call you names.
What did they call you?
Well, scabs, that's what they call you, scabs, when you walk across the picket line to go to work. And but my job depended on it, and my children's food and a quart of milk to feed them with and all that.
Did and your husband during the strike, what was he doing?
He was working as a security guard, helping protect things, you
Was
see.
that his job generally?
He worked in on the humidifier job.
Did a lot of men get called out to work on construction?
Oh yeah, his daddy did too. His daddy did the same thing. But now his daddy was like Arthur's daddy was. He wasn't a watchman, but he run this, what you call it, well, it was called a supply house at first, but then later on they changed it to storeroom keeper. You know, where they keep all the supplies that they have to use in the mill, and you get a requisition to come out there and get a new piece you need, you know, to fix a machine with. And then after my husband got too old to climb ladders and work as a humidifier man, 'cause there was, you know, the big humidifiers and air conditioning and things up there, they put him out there to doing the same job that his daddy did. So his title of the last job he did when he retired, he was called storeroom keeper. But now he had worked in the card room. He could work all the way through the card room and do most anything to do down there.
Now, during the course of the strike, did you see your husband much?
Oh yeah, they'd come in and out, but they'd be gone nearly a week at a time.
Did they do the same kind of work here in Payne City that they did in Taylor County?
Yeah, they made yarn just like we did here. See, they had a mill in Taylor County. It was called Taylor Mill, and then they had 3 mills in Porterdale, Georgia, and then they had 3 in Macon because they had the number 1, number 2 in Payne Mill.
Did what happened over at number 2 during the strike? Do you know?
No, I don't. I think the strike mostly was carried out in Payne City.
Why did they choose Payne City and not over
I
number
don't know.
2?
I really don't know.
It must have been. I mean, did they have mill villages over by number 2 and number 1, or just here?
Yeah, they had mill villages. A lot of those houses on Oglethorpe Street was mill houses. And this house down here that Mr. Cochran lives in, when they dissolved Willingham Cotton Mills, it was a private-owned company. Was on Holt Avenue. It's used for storage space now. That house he lives in was moved off of Holt Avenue down Rolfe Avenue and set up out there.
People have told me that one of the reasons that folks went out on strike was because of the stretch out.
They was wanting the mills to pay more money than what they were paying. They were dissatisfied with their working hours and their pay. That's what it was. You see, before the NRA started, I know you've heard of that. Roosevelt started that.
What do you think of Roosevelt?
I liked him on account of that. See, we were working 60 hours a week and making 10 and 15 cents an hour, see? And when the NRA started, we went to working 8 hours a day and made 25 cents an hour. That was the lowest you could make, see? So you see, I was making $12 a week for 40 hours where I had been working for 10 and 15 cents an hour, 60 hours a week, see? So we just liked that, you know, because that was the lowest pay you could pay was 25 cents.
What did the company think of the new wages?
Well, they had to compile with it, you know, because it was law. In the National Recovery Act was what Roosevelt brought the Depression out. You see, that was what brought the Depression area out. See, during the Depression years, which was in the early 30s, I had 3 children. I had one in 33 and one in 34 and one in 35.
How were you able to, with the working so many hours and getting that amount of money, was it difficult to make ends meet?
Well, you could hire, well, no, because things were priced at that, we was talking about the 5-cent Coke, you see. And I could send my little children down here at the clubhouse and give them a nickel, and they had a 3-center, which was a drink. And you could get a great big cracker about that big, which was kind of like a tea cake. They were called penny wheels, and they was penny apiece. I could give them a nickel, and they'd go down there and get them a drink and 2 penny wheels, which would fill them up, you know. And that was just great. Well, you could get buttermilk for 5 cents a quart, sweet milk maybe for 10, 15 cents a quart.
How did you spend? You told me before it was like 35 cents per room.
That was when we first moved here. You paid 35 cents per room, and that included your lights and water. Of course, we didn't have gas.
How much water could you use?
You could use any amount of water, I guess you wanted to. They didn't set no record on that.
And the lights?
And there was 1 drop cord in each room, and they wouldn't allow you to burn but about a 60-watt bulb in it, see. And they would come around there once in a while and inspect, and you wasn't allowed to have a hot plate. A lot of people wanted these little electric hot plates. You know what I'm talking about,
Yes.
don't you? And they wouldn't let you have them. And when people started, and later on, when people started buying refrigerators, that was the first thing that come out, you know, and then they had to put in meters, light meters, to pay for the electricity. And then later on, people got wanting washing machines and then electric stoves and things like that. So they had to come in and rewire the houses then and put in the 230 wire, because all they had was the 110. And you know, a dryer and a stove has to have a 230, 220 or something like that.
So let's say in 1933, right? 34,
1933 and 34,
Okay.
we didn't have these things.
Right. Oh, but you had the drop cord.
It just hung down from right where that one is now. It hung down, and you switched it on and off. It was low enough you could reach it, like that string is coming down
And that's
there.
all the light you had in
That
each
was
room.
all the light you
Is
had
that
in
enough
each room.
light?
Well, it was as much light as that. If that was a 60-watt bulb up there, it would be as much light as that.
And so how much were your expenses for a week, let's say in 1934? Or a month?
I'd say my grocery bill would run about $7 a week for 5 in the family and a maid. It'd run about $7 a week. But now we didn't eat. I remember one time I had a maid that says, you know, I never have fried chicken since I've been here. I said, well, we can't afford to buy them. And once in a while on Sunday we'd have a fried chicken, you know, but she wouldn't be there. And she says, I never have fried a chicken here. But we had peas and butter beans and cornbread and taters and things like that. And then there was a man that run a little vegetable truck back at that time. And he'd come through here with his little truck peddling fresh vegetables. And he'd stop and you could go out and buy fresh vegetables off of it. You know, like turnips or collard, whatever was in season.
Did you
know.
keep a garden at that
Not
time?
then, not at that time. Now, one time they did turn over that property down yonder where the tennis courts are, and where the playground is, and people had gardens down there. And we made one year, 1 or 2 years, I believe, and my children was all small, my 3 oldest ones. And I went down there and worked hard, and then when it got about time to gather the crop and thing, as it was made, my husband, he just didn't want to go down there and help. And then when we would go down there and work in the evenings and come home, I had to fix supper and tend to all 3 of the children, where he went and sat down and didn't do anything. So I just quit. I couldn't do that, you see, because my children was more important than trying to make a garden.
So during the strike, were you able to feed yourselves okay?
Pretty good. We had something to eat at. They'd have a soup kitchen, and then Mr. Solomon run this dairy up here. And back then you could go up there and take your own bucket and get a gallon of skim milk for a dime. And there's a lot of times that skim milk and some cornbread was all we had.
That was during September 34.
Yeah, during the time of the Depression, you know. But during the strike, we worked and we got along pretty good, because my husband was working and I went back to work, see. And see, I couldn't get my maid to come, see, and Miss Whitlock was keeping the children. Well, you see, I didn't have to pay her. But let's put it like this. I worked 40 hours a week and I made $12. I had 3 babies to look after. But now this wasn't during the strike. This was after the strike, because the strike came off in 34. And my 3rd baby was born in 36. I would pay a maid $3 a week. I made 12. They were glad to get that, because some of them wasn't paying their maids but 2. I paid mine 3 because I had them 3 babies to look after, and I always had a good one. And I figured time I paid her $3 and fed her, she was making as much money as I was, you know, because I was getting 12. And she was getting 1/4 of what I made, plus I was feeding her. But my grocery bill would run about $7 a week then.
So could you save your husband's money if you were working? Did you get to save his paycheck since
Oh
you
no,
both were working?
oh no, we had to have all of it to live on.
Could you save any money?
We didn't save any money. We might have a little bit, you know. And I remember one year, of course it was after that, years after that, we had saved some money and we had pretty good little nest egg. And we thought we was doing just fine, and we always went to church. But we didn't tithe, you know. Our tithe money was going into our savings. And it worried me too, you know, because we wasn't doing that. So we had a right pretty good little nest egg. And we got down sick during the 2nd flu epidemic. Not the first one, you know, but it was a big flu epidemic. And we all had the flu and got down sick. And we spent all of our money, and it was just before Christmas, and when it got Christmas time, we had to borrow money to buy our children Santa Claus. And I said, well, that's just it. I said, that wasn't our money, it belonged to the Lord. And after that, I went to tithing, and I've always tithed ever since, and I've never got in that shape anymore.
Did you get any sort of health insurance from the company? They had a doctor, didn't they?
Oh yeah, we had a doctor and a nurse. And if you needed the doctor to come out to your house, it didn't cost you anything. You could go to the clinic, and the nurse would, if you was out sick, now like if you didn't go to work and you sent in word that you were sick, that visiting nurse came to see if you was really sick. You know, you had to be sick. And of course we didn't get no sick leave. We didn't have any sick leave. I don't think we ever did have any sick leave. I don't believe we did.
Do you think, is that something that the people that were on strike were trying to get?
Probably was. But we never did. But now, years later, we got some vacation pay, you know. Well, now, I believe they had that when we was here. They called it paying off, when we first come here, they called it paying off a bonus. But you had to work, you had to be at work 12 months before you got it. And they would start it from the last day of July until the last day of July the next year. You know, it run 12 months. And you had to be working that day and be working through that day again. And then you would get a percentage of what you had earned in that 12 months. And they called it a vacation paycheck, you know. And it would average up to about a week's work. But it would be according to what your earnings was. But now you had to be working the last day of July and work till the last day of July again, unless you lost it, you see, you didn't get it.
Tell me about getting your pay envelopes. When was payday?
Well, when we first started getting paid off, they paid us off in money. And in a little envelope like you get from the bank, you know. And
Did you save yours?
no, I don't have one. But it was something kind of like the little envelopes you get at the bank now. and they'd put your money in there and pass it out to you. They'd come around through the mill. They'd have the payman would have it in a little thing around his neck, you know, and he'd come around to your job and whistle at you and give you your pay envelope. They didn't start paying off in checks. It was years and years. I don't remember what year it was they started paying off in checks. And then they would come around through the mill and hand them out to you, you know.
I've seen pictures of payday of it being outside and people lining up outside.
Well, now, when we worked in Albany, that's the way we did. We worked, we had to work 5 hours on Saturday morning, and we had to walk outside to where the office was at and pick up our paychecks, and we'd be standing in line out there for that. And sometimes they would be filled up, those pay envelopes, and they'd be short some money or something like that, and they'd have to go through every one of those pay envelopes and before they could pay us off and find that money, whatever amount it was, wasn't but a dime. There was a mistake in it somewhere, you know. And we stood long times out there like that waiting for our money. So that did take place in the early cotton mill times. But it's like I said, I moved here in 28, and then me and my husband married in 29.
So you met him here, your husband?
Met him here. And then after I met him, my family moved back to Thomaston. And then we married in February of 28. And then in 28, he and I would go from Macon to Thomaston, you know. But the first day of September 1929, he and I moved back to Macon for the last time. And, you know, so that's how far my record goes back. 1st September 1929 would be my continuous record with Payne Mill.
Why do you think the company was so anti-union?
I don't know why they were. They just didn't want to be unionized, and none of the mills in Macon never was unionized. Not many of the cotton mills in the South ever was, I don't believe, because they were against it. It was mostly the northern sections of the country that, you know, had the unions. But now a lot of places you can't even go to work unless you belong to the union. Now, I don't know whether it's in the cotton mills like that now or not, but it never was that way here, right on up till it closed down.
What was that day like when they closed the mill?
It was like a funeral, you might say, because people had been working here all their life and living here all their life, and of course they transferred a lot of them that they could, you know, to other places, and there was a lady lived right in front of me, her and her husband. They sent them to Taylor Mill, I believe, and they worked down there a long time, and then I think they finally went up north. They, you know, moved up north. They don't live. They moved to Dublin and stayed there a long time after they left here.
People down the street, Mr. Brady and his wife, Sarah,
Yeah.
she said, it's like the end of the world. It was like the world just stopped.
Yeah, when the mill stopped, it was just, it just floored everybody. Well, it didn't only hurt the employees and because when that time come, a lot of the people that lived in Payne City was retired people like me and the Bradys, you see. Well, Payne City's income, you might say, come from the mill. And see, we knew we was gonna lose that. And we having a hard time now keeping Payne City together on account of the mill being closed down, because we don't have any industry. And we're not getting any of the sales tax. We're trying to, but we hadn't succeeded yet. And the tax assessor, Ray Jackson, he came out one night and talked to us last year. And he said, if you could get 1/10 of 1% of that sales tax that they went up on last year, Said if you could get 0.1%, says you could operate Payne City on it. But you see, we spending our money in Macon, in Bibb County. All of our money is spent there, and we having to pay sales tax. But Payne City is not getting any sales tax money to operate it with. So right now we in a bind, but we're gonna hold it if we can. We're gonna hold it if we can. Now, like they went up on the city taxes of Macon, you see, and a lot of other places. And so last year they went up on ours again last year, and this year they just about doubled it from what it was last year. But you see, the city went up too. Macon did, you see. We had been paying 4 meals, and this year they went up to 8 meals. See, on Payne City tax. That don't have anything to do with the county tax. And you see, there's no exemptions on Payne City tax. You can get homestead exemptions on county tax. And you see, this house, I don't have to pay any county tax because I get double exemptions. I wouldn't if it was in my name. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I give it to my son because I had it happen to a sister-in-law, and I had it happen to a neighbor right back there. They had to go in a nursing home.
They lost everything.
And you see, they get what you got. But it's got to be done 2 years in advance before that happens.
Well, you look pretty good to me.
So actually, so far as my children's concerned, it's still my home. But according by law, it belongs to my oldest son. You know, if he wanted to take it away from me, he could. But you see, I knew he wouldn't, because he helps provide for me. And he's never married, and he's already retired. He spent 4 years in the Air Force and then worked 35 years for Ticor Company in Los Angeles, and he retired last year in May. And so he's situated for life. He says, I don't even worry about getting my Social Security. I says, why don't you put in for your disability Social Security? He's just 57 years old. Because he's contacted glaucoma. Ms. Whitlock, his grandmother on the Whitlock side, had glaucoma. And so he has it now. And I said, you wouldn't have any trouble getting your disability Social Security if you'd put in for it, because the position that you had requires that you use your eyes. Because he worked for the Ticor Company, and they and what they do is insure the loans on, like if I borrowed money from the bank to buy this house, they insured that loan. No much more to tell you, except the living conditions here was nice, because we had the social worker, and we had a village man that was called a village man, and which now we have what they call a police that just works.
Was that
Mr. Cobb.
Mr. Cobb?
Yeah, of course we had different ones that come in, and some of them's pictures is in that book. But Mr. Cobb was the main one, and the children all around here respected him. But then we would have a village man besides him, because he was chief electrician at the mill, and was up until he retired. And of course, when you retired from the mill, you had to move, because you didn't live here unless you worked in the mill, until they sold the houses, you know.
What were the rules here that the mill made for people that lived here? Were there rules?
Oh yeah, you had to have rules that when you lived on the village, you had to abide by their rules.
What were
And
they?
they had this big auditorium out here that he was telling you about, and you was required to go to Sunday school. And you couldn't, they had clotheslines put up on the outside of on clothesline posts, and you wasn't allowed to put a clothesline string. You know how people put a string on the back porch to hang clothes on? You couldn't do that. They had the village men that worked the streets and took up the garbage and stuff. They'd come around and pull it down. You wasn't allowed to have a clothes.
They had poles, but no clotheslines.
Oh yeah, they had clotheslines, but they had outside the company put them up, see, for that purpose. Well, you know how people like to put a string up to hang clothes on the back porch, and you couldn't do that. And They kept the streets clean. You didn't have to cut the grass. You didn't have to. They kept the garbage picked up. The streets had to be kept clean. There was for years that there wasn't any grass. It was just dirt, and they paved these roads in '49. 47 is when they paved these roads. The year my little girl was born, they paved these streets. It was just dirt roads, and what was I trying to tell? Anyhow,
You're talking about rules.
it was all just dirt roads, and these houses were not blocked up under. When we first come here, they had lattice on them, little lattice under all of them. They were blocked up under with that lattice. Well, termites got in it, so they just come tore it all out. And there wasn't anything under the houses. They was just open until the people bought them, and then they started blocking up on. Some of them not blocked up under now. One right up the street there, that a man that owns it, he did, never did block up on it. Some people bought several houses, to rent them out, and it was just one big playground for all the children. You didn't say nothing about kids playing in your yard, or it was just a big playground. And of course, we had the playground down here where the clubhouse is. I know he told you about that, and where the swimming pool was, and they covered it up. And when the bill got rid of the houses, they give the auditorium and the swimming pool to the church. Well, the church didn't want the swimming pool. We couldn't afford to operate it, but they kept the auditorium. Well, then they just covered up the swimming pool and give it back to Payne City. The bib did. The bib gave it to the church, but then they covered it up and give it back to Payne City, because it's expensive to operate a swimming pool. You got to hire a lifeguard and all that,
What was it like when the strike was over? Do you remember? Do you remember when the strike was called off?
When the strike was called off? No, I can't, except they put those people back to work, and we didn't like it because they put them back to work, because they come back and went on the same jobs they had when they walked out. But it didn't make any difference. I don't think the people, they didn't kind of hold a grudge against them too bad, because we all got to be friends again, and all. It was just like one big family in Payne City, and it's like I said, the big manufacturing company, when they moved somebody into Payne City, they was the pick of the crop. They didn't just move anybody in here, And if you didn't abide by the rules of the company, and if you didn't wasn't a nice person and behaved yourself, you lost your job and had to move out. I remember one time a social worker was in a woman's house. I done forgot whose it was now, but I remember her doing that. And she found a library book in there that had belonged to one of the other mills. And they had been moved from one of the other mills to Payne City. And because these people had that library book that belonged in the library at one of the other mills, they let them go. It was kind of strict. It was. If you lived in Payne City, you had to be a lady and a gentleman. Of course, we always had some men that drank, but as long as they didn't drink on the job. In fact, I had an overseer that he used to get drunk on the weekends.
Everybody knew it.
Yeah, everybody knew it. But then they didn't allow you to do it, at work. And then we didn't have very many black people working up there then. Mostly the black people that worked was the floor sweepers and the people that worked in the opening room and all, like I told you, back down there where all that dust was at.
So it was mostly men, black men.
Yeah, black men. Well, they had black women that swept the floors, because there was a black woman that worked in the spinning room, and we just thought the world of her. We had two that retired from up there.
Were they spinners?
No, not then they wasn't. But later on, when integration started, they had to put them in there to doing the same thing we did. And when the mill was shut down, there was more black people worked up there than there was white.
But they never lived here.
Not when this belonged to the Bibb. And that's why all the cotton mills in the South sold their houses. Not only in Macon, but the Carolinas and all over Georgia. All the cotton mills in the South sold the houses to the employees that lived in the house. And these were sold in '64. It's when we bought these houses. Because of the integration and to keep the black people from moving in. But now we have black people living here.
They live right here?
Mm-hmm. I had a black neighbor out there last year. But they were so sorry and lazy. They were just renting that house, you see, and they finally had to run them off. Belonged to a real estate company, and they were so bad and all till they finally had to make them move. I got a nice young couple out there now. I got a daughter about 8 years old, and they're real nice. But now down on where he was telling you about the 6-room houses, there's about 3 black families I think lives down there. But they don't own, they rent from real estate companies.
No, the black people that worked at the mill lived.
They lived off the village.
What was that neighborhood
At
called?
Bartlett Crossing, a lot of people they did, and then they lived over here off Log Cabin Drive, back up on the far end of Brookdale Avenue and back in there, all around here, you know. There wasn't any black people living right down in here at that time, but now a lot of these houses from here back up to Napier Avenue, there's a lot of black people lives in them. And see, that was another mill village over there.
Which mill was over there?
The other side of Brookdale Avenue, after you get out this street here, and you get to where those houses that would be on your left if you was going towards Napier, that was another mill village. And when I moved here, it was called Adams Duck Mill. But in later years, long time, the Bibb bought it, and it was called the Bellevue plant. And what they made over there, the machinery was round like this. Now, when Adams Duck Mill owned it, they made duck. And Willingham was a duck mill. They made canvas and stuff like that. And Willingham Mill was a duck mill. At one time, Willingham Cotton Mills down there on Holt Avenue made the world's greatest canvas. It was the world's greatest canvas. That was a duck mill. It made heavy ducking stuff. And then after the Bibb bought it over, they called it the Bellevue plant, and they made this knit. It turned it into a knitting mill. And they made this knit stuff like you make these T-shirts out of that don't have a seam in them, you know. It was round stuff like you make T-shirts out of.
How much education did you say you had? Schooling. Education.
I went to school 4 years.
First grade to 4th grade?
We lived in the country, and so far back in Sticks where my daddy lived. Like I told you, he was a tenant farmer. A man owned a great big plantation, and he had people hired to work that plantation, and we would live right in the middle of the field, maybe a mile or 2 from where we lived to the road, you know, except just a little pathway like. And we lived so far back in Sticks, and I was kind of puny like. And my mama wouldn't let me start to school till I was 8 years old when I started to school. And of course I had to start, and then they had the primer, you know. Had mostly what kindergarten, but they called it the primer. And you had to start there and go on up. Well, when I started, my sister next to me, she was just 6. We started at the same time. And so I was learning so much faster than she was until they would just move me on up that first year until I got to where I should have been, you know. And I just went right on up. So you might say I started school in 2nd grade. And I was 8 years old then. Well, when I was 12, I went to work in the mill.
Did you want to stay in school?
Yeah, I really did. And if we had been working, I always wanted to go back to school. And I used to think, you know, that after we started working 8 hours a day, I could have, if I'd had the opportunity that kids have now, you see, I could have went back to school, but back then we didn't have that opportunity. And so that was all the public education I got. When I quit and went to work, I had been promoted to the 7th grade. My last promotion card, it's probably still here, it was, you know, that where I was promoted from the 6th to the 7th grade. And I had to quit and go to work in the mill.
Were you afraid when you first started working in the mill?
No, because we moved there, and I was always kind of growny-like, you know, and big for my age. But then you had to have a doctor's physical and a note from the Board of Education and all that, you know, to let you go to work at that age. So I went to work there in Albany, and then we moved to Thomaston, and I had to work at night. And you couldn't work at night till you got 17 years old, because you worked 12 hours at night, from 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And so Mama says, she's 17 years old. But I had to go and get a physical from the doctor and a certificate from the school board.
Did they ever find out?
That I was 17 years old. No, wait till I tell you when I got to be 15. I was 17 years old. Well, then we moved to Macon, and I had to work at night, 12 hours, so I was still 17 years old. So when I got married then, I married at 15. I was 15 in June and married the following February. Well, when I come back to work at Payne Mill after I married, and the overseer went to sign me up, the overseer would sign you up. And he says, all right, Mary, what's your age? They always call me Mary. And I says, well, I ain't gonna lie about it no more. I says, I'm just 15 years old. He looked at me, he says, Mary, you ain't but 15 years. I said, no, I was 15 years old last June. I was born in 1912. I said, I ain't gonna lie about my age no more. So I had been working, but they wouldn't let me work at night. So I've been working ever since, and that's what my record is with the company up there. Born 1912.
And retired in
62. Oh, no. 74.
There's a lot of years.
I was born in 12, see, and I went to work up here. When I married, I was, you might say, 15, see. And then that year we went back and forth to Thomaston, you know, that first year that we married in 28. In September 1929, we moved back here, and that's how long my record with the bill was when I retired in 74. From September 29 until March or April of 74.
So you were about 20 years old in 1934.
Yeah, I was almost 21 when my first baby was born. Because he was born in 33, see, and he was born in May, and I was 21 in June. So I didn't have a baby when I first married. Then I had one in 33 and one in 34 and one in 36. Then there was 11 years between him and the little girl. We learned a little bit, you know. And then when I got pregnant with her, I almost had a nervous breakdown because I had done quit. I had 3 boys. I wasn't going to have no more babies. But I got pregnant. And it was 11 years. That boy in the middle was 11 years old the 5th day of September, and she was born the 17th. Well, then there's 5 years between her and the baby. I was 40 when he was born.
How'd you feel about having him?
You know, I didn't feel as bad about it as I did when I got pregnant with her. I don't know why. And see, my oldest son was already in service when this one was born. There was 19 years difference in their age.
My mama had me when she was 36.
Well, he was born the 2nd day of May, and I was 40 the 26th day of June. So you might as well say I was 40 years old when he came along. And from the time I got pregnant with him, I knew I was at an odd age, you know. And I done everything I could for my baby, you know, 'cause I wanted him to be healthy. And I guess he is. He's 38 years old. And,
He looks healthy over
and
there.
doing pretty good. Well, that was his high school graduation picture from Lanier High School.
Were you surprised at all that violence that took place?
I guess that I was so young and so mad because it was going on that I wasn't afraid of it. Somehow or another, it just made me mad.
The union people made you mad.
Yeah.
How come?
Well, I wanted to work. I didn't want to quit. I needed to work. And there they was trying to shut the mill down, and I needed to work.
Do you think they were trying to work, that they were trying to get something that would better you?
Well, I don't guess I realized it at that time, you know. But that was really what they was wanting, you know. They was wanting less hours and more pay. Well, we was getting 8 hours then, so what did they want? They wanted to cut it down to 6 hours. And that sounded stupid to me, 'cause I had been working 12 hours a day and was getting 8 hours a day. And I says, and they was wanting to cut it down to 6 hours a day. Well, you know, that hadn't happened anywhere, even since then, or before.
I was under the impression that they wanted the conditions in the mill to be different. That it was too fast. Things were too fast. The stretch out.
Well, it never did slow up any. Right on up till I retired.
Was that too fast for you?
Well, I worked till I was 62. And I really worked. I was telling my doctor one day what I did in one day, and when probably I was in my 60s or something like that. And he said, "Miss Whitlock, you couldn't possibly do all that work in one day." I said, "Well, you don't have to take my word for it." I said, "They got a man with a stopwatch and a pen and a pencil going around behind me to see." And I said, "He puts down everything I do." I says, "I can bring you that report down here." He says, "You couldn't possibly do that much in one day." I said, "Well, I can prove it to you."
What was that guy called?
They was called efficiency experts, so, you know, that's what they was in there for that purpose, to see if you was earning what you was making. You really had to work fast and earn it.
Did you ever get good pay raises? Did you want more money?
Well, naturally, everybody would want more money, you know. I had a pretty big job, and I had been on it for a long time because I was running the coarsest yarn up there. And when I retired, it took 2 people to run my job. And of course, I just knew how to handle it because I had been doing it so long.
Did you miss working in the mill when you were tired?
No, I was ready. I was ready to come out because I had got arthritis and got in such bad shape and all till it was hard for me to make a day's work. So I think I was ready. I never did care about going back. In fact, I never did go up there back 2 or 3 more times just to even look over the place. I was ready because I had worked 50 years and I thought that was enough. Because I went to work at 12 and worked till I was 62. And had raised 5 kids, you see. And then I had Miss Whitlock from 1952 until she died in 74. And she came to live with me. My baby was born in May, and she came to live with me in August. And she was in pretty good shape then, but then in years to come, she got pretty feeble and she got blind, you know, and she couldn't hear good. She was good, though. She was a good person. Me and her couldn't live together. If there ever was a saint this side of heaven, she was one of them, and everybody knew it, that Granny Whitlock was it. And she lived with me. My husband died in September of 72, and I was still working. And I was having to be up a lot with her at night. I had a sitter in the daytime to stay with her, but that sitter couldn't come till after I went to work. She says, "Miss Whitlock, I can't get that till 8 o'clock." Well, I had to be on my job at 7. She had a child, and she had to take that child to somebody to keep. And she had to come from way out in South Macon, out on Broadway, catch the bus, transfer, and come out here and walk from Bellevue to my house. But she says, "Now, you go on to work," for she says, "I'm coming." Says, "If I'm not going to be there," says, "I'm going to let you know in time that I'm not coming, so you can make other arrangements." And she didn't let me down. I'd have to be on the job at 7 o'clock, but she says, "I'm going to be there." Well, I'd tell Granny, I'd say, "Now, Granny, you stay here in this bed till she gets here." And she slept in here. But I had her trained, and we had it fixed. She could get off of that bed and go all the way to the bathroom, holding things, and back to her bed and get on it. And she'd walk up to the table, and I'd pull the chair out, and I'd push the chair up under. I said, "Sit down now, Granny." And I'd pick her plate and put it there in front of her, and I'd tell her what she had to eat, and she could eat it. I didn't have to feed her. But when she went to the nursing home, they started feeding her, and things like that. But see, my husband died in September of '72, and then in February of '83, it just looked like I couldn't take